Yo, I'm Mike, the ringmaster of the Imagination Circus, and I'm here to talk to you about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Alright, I'm here to talk to you about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, Episode 5 of Season 1, Griffon the Brush Off. Now, this episode opens up with our third pony, Pinkie Pie, boasting about Rainbow Dash's tricks to one Twilight Sparkle.
She pulled up. And then she looped around and around like woo, 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 woo.
Now, Twilight is clearly only half listening as she's reading a book on this park bench, when suddenly, who should fly overhead but Rainbow Dash herself. So, Pinkie Pie, of course, goes to follow her.
Pinkie Pie? Not again. Rainbow Dash! Not now, Pinkie Pie. But Rainbow Dash!
Twilight then shows a bit of a sentiment
Phew.
that indicates that clearly this is pretty early on, where Twilight is clearly not gotten used to having friends yet, and therefore is not used to being sensitive or caring about what they're saying. But then again, Pinkie can also be a bit of an acquired taste, so I can kind of understand it, even though I personally could listen to her for hours. I mean, I might get bored or annoyed occasionally, or even eventually, but I could listen to her for hours. Don't judge me. Noting that she's being followed, Rainbow Dash, of course, tries to avoid Pinkie Pie. This actually shows an interesting contrast to later on, as these two would have one of the best relationships in the entire series between members of the main six, which could indicate in the long run that at this point, most of the members of the main six are friends, but they're not super close just yet, which makes sense. I mean, who knows? Rainbow Dash might not have necessarily been living in Ponyvale for that long. Rainbow Dash continues to try to avoid Pinkie Pie, with absolutely no success.
I was gonna tell you to look out for that mountain. Watch out for that tree! George, watch out for that tree! George, watch out for that! Watch out for that!
George, watch out for that!
Every attempt that Rainbow makes to avoid Pinkie here is a clear example of two things. One, it's Rainbow's personality and Pinkie's personality. And in clearly showing their personalities, we get a view on who they are. Pinkie is somebody who's not going to give up easily and who will constantly go about in the weirdest ways to get her friends involved in whatever strange thing she happens to be interested in at the moment, while Rainbow Dash is the kind of person who, being speedy, doesn't really want to be bogged down by somebody she sees as, I'm going to use the word slow. As far as she's concerned, Pinkie is annoying and wastes times and just ridiculous with no sense of any sort of anything, in a sense. You know, she doesn't seem to... As far as Rainbow Dash is concerned, Pinkie has no clear direction. She just does whatever with no concern for anything or anybody. And to be fair, that's an easy assumption to make at a glance. But the old adage exists for a reason. Don't judge a book by its cover. It's there. So, yeah. Now, after all of Pinkie Pie's hilarious gags and one expertly timed and written Looney Tunes reference.
Les pauvres, les pauvres, les pauvres, les...
You smelled me out, you little sandy witch.
part where these two come together for the true beginning of this episode's story. Pinkie Pie, as it turns out, feels like in a pranking mood. Makes sense. Occasionally you just want to mess with your friends. It's fun. And who does she turn to but Rainbow Dash? And that makes sense, because Rainbow Dash, despite her being serious about flying and therefore having a sort of direction and ambition in her life, wanting to be a Wonderbolt, is mostly a non-serious character and can even be a little bit insensitive. That's fine, that's a part of her personality. Some people are like that. Hell, I'm like that from time to time. But what it helps here is that combining, Rainbow Dash is not taking much seriously outside of her own ambition and, of course, friendship and loyalty, along with Pinkie Pie's expert comedy timing. We come together for what I consider to be some decent to actually pretty funny pranks. And so these two start off on a bit of a pranking spree. Starting off with, of course, Spike, which, to be fair, is par for the course for his character up in this till this point. They're basically been using him as a bit of a mouthpiece, and of course for a few cheap jokes. I still take offense to that, but all things considered, I can live with it here because you know what? It's fair how they use him. So basically, they set up a prank where he gets scared by a thunderbolt created by Rainbow Dash kicking a cloud. Which is something only a Pegasus can do, which means that Pinkie specifically gathered up Rainbow for this specific prank because she needed her, because she was her primary prank possible friend. Meaning that of the two Pegasus that we know that Pinkie's friends with at this point, of the two, which one is really more likely to get involved in pranks? Although, to be fair, I imagine if Fluttershy ever actually put her mind to it, she might not be too bad by a prank, at the very least. Nobody would ever see it coming.
Rainbow Dash, we startled Spike into getting the hiccups!
Really, Pinkie? Really? And by extension, the writers of MLP, we couldn't get that. I'm sorry. I thank you, because there was really no chance we were ever going to figure it out. In reality, this is a rather annoying example of something that happens a lot in children's television, where adult writers for shows feel the need to explain something as plainly as possible because children are supposedly too stupid to figure it out on their own. This is a somewhat egregious example here, but all things considered, I'll let it slide because it only happens really this one time in the whole episode. All things considered, Spike is pretty okay with this. He finds it funny, even.
Good one, Pinkie Pie. You're always pulling a fast one on me.
Even though he's got the hiccups, which, in my experience, is one of the most annoying things in the world. But hey, if it's funny, it's funny. Although, I've got to admit, this is probably the weakest, or at least one of the weakest pranks they actually throw in this whole episode. Also, I imagine Celestia to be very confused at the moment. They follow up pranking Spike by pranking Rarity, of all ponies. And I like that she, of all the ponies in the episode who they prank, seems to be the one who adjusts the quickest after realizing she's been pranked. Also, it's a fairly funny prank. They go for a lot of classic gags in this episode, which is fine. Some of them work, some of them don't. I will say that I did find myself laughing more than I expected to at a lot of these. They then move on to pranking Twilight with invisible ink, which I feel like she would be the most annoyed here, and judging by her face, I feel like she's come to terms with it like, okay, it's just Rainbow and Pinkie. It's not that big a deal, but you can clearly tell she's still kind of annoyed there. Like, look at that face. Just look at that face. I'm just saying. Finally, we get to Applejack. And I gotta say, I think the prank on Applejack is my favorite. She's clearly the really most irritated, as this makes sense. as while in the case of Twilight, you could say it's mostly her personality, and she's not like earning money from whatever she's doing, she's just basically fulfilling her hobby, which is magic. It also happens to be her talent, whatever. But in the case of Applejack specifically, this is her livelihood, like her actual livelihood, as in this is how her and her whole family makes money. So the idea that she seems that irritated that she starts throwing the apples at Pinky and Rainbow, yeah, that makes sense. What I've been like about this prank, however, is one, it's one of the things that stands out the most visually in the series so far, like just the amount of colors and patterns used on the apples, and the fact that they apparently are that good that they painted them so precisely. It's kind of amazing, and I love it. And it's a great addition to their personalities. Though I imagine, knowing Rainbow, I think Pinky might have done most of the work. But who knows? Rainbow could secretly be an art savant, or a painting savant specifically. You never know, and it would be a great addition to her personality. After moving on from that, they do one more simple prank. In this case, they try to prank somebody with a fake turtle, which they will spray in the face with a spout of water. This is another good point in the episode when it comes to establishing these two characters' personalities, which in this case is that Rainbow's first instinct is to continue to prank the individual there, even though it turns out to be Fluttershy.
Fluttershy.
Because clearly that's not a good idea, but of course Rainbow's instincts when it comes to, shall we say, social behavior and just common sense seem to be just the tiniest bit faulty. Just the tiniest bit. No disrespect to her. Then there's Pinky.
What? No. We can't prank Fluttershy. I mean, she's so sensitive. It'll hurt her feelings. Even our most harmless prank. Yeah, you're right.
Who is smart enough, being who she is, and this makes sense, because Pinky is pretty much friends with everybody in Ponyville to a certain extent. Even if they're just, like, not a super close friend, she is close enough to them to know their preferences. We learn about this later in the series, and here it shows, early on, they're setting up that part of Pinky's personality, that she knows everybody in town enough to know that Fluttershy should not be pranked, because at this point in the series, it's too early, and Fluttershy just wouldn't be able to take it. And so, Rainbow, seeing reason, listening to Pinkie Pie, good job, by the way, Rainbow, decides not to prank her, and they decide to prank somebody else. Or, as it turns out, Pinky decided to prank somebody else. I like that, like pretty much everybody else, after the initial shock of being pranked comes in, everybody else comes and, like, doesn't get too irritated or anything. They all kind of have a good nature when it comes to being pranked this way.
Oh, yes! You're very close.
And that's a good sign, because you know what? If the person in question isn't going to be handled being pranked, you probably shouldn't prank them. And if they don't take the prank particularly badly, as we'll see later in this episode, well, yeah. I will also point out that I like that it comes back around to Fluttershy. That's a nice touch. We then transition on to the next morning, in which we see Pinkie Pie going about her business, headed towards Rainbow Dash's residence, wearing what I can only call one of Pinky's many Pinky devices. Kind of like Bat gadgets from Batman, only more Joker-esque. Freaky. Moving right along, we get to Rainbow Dash's house, which is a cloud palace, for lack of a better term, where Pinkie Pie calls out to her, when we suddenly see the head of something. It looks like a bird, but it apparently has telescopic lenses for eyes. This is Gilda, which we learn is Dash's old friend from Junior Speedster's flight camp. It is interesting to note that apparently Griffon parents can send their Griffon children to a pony flight school. Or just I guess it's just a flight school, but as we later learn, Gilda seems to be the only non-pony there. Or I guess I should say non-Pegasus, seeing as there are no other ponies there, because of course, no other ponies except alicorns have wings, so yeah. We also get this interesting scene of Rainbow and Gilda. I might add that Gilda is far less enthusiastic, unless you couldn't tell, about doing the Speedster's apparent creed, motto. You know, I'm going with motto. It's definitely a motto, or speech, theme song. Maybe it's a theme song. I don't know. I'm distracted by how enthusiastic Rainbow Dash is.
Skybound swords and daring dodge, junior speedsters, it's our quest to someday be the very best.
Now the thing is, I find this scene particularly remarkable because, and this is important, Gilda clearly doesn't want to do the song. She does it unenthusiastically alongside Rainbow Dash, but the important part is that despite not wanting to, she does it. And she specifically says,
Ugh, only for you, Dash.
That's what's important here. Now, it shows that despite her somewhat rough and tough kind of bad girl attitude and sort of jerkishness, as we'll see full on later in the episode, she does consider Rainbow her friend, to the point that she's doing this thing reluctantly, but she is doing it, and she's doing it because she wants to make Rainbow happy, or at least that's the way it comes off. Now, one could argue that she's just doing it so that Dash will stop and spend time with her, and that's probably part of it. But it clearly showed that Gilda is not all bad. It even plants the seeds for part of her personality that we come more well acquainted with later down the line. So I'd say points to the writers for this. This is really good characterization. It's pretty clear that Gilda doesn't want Pinkie in on her and Rainbow's fun. So of course, she calls in a supposed promise that Rainbow made to her, and Rainbow being loyalty, no matter what some bronies may say, goes off with her, reluctantly leaving Pinkie behind. Pinkie is slightly disheartened by this, but mostly fine. She does show up later. Now, of course, it's here that we start to see Gilda's real personality, or at least the part of her personality that she puts off to pretty much everybody except Rainbow Dash. Gilda swiftly tricks Rainbow Dash, proving another point of Rainbow's personality.
So, Dash, got any new moves in your Trictionary? Or are you 100% old school? New moves? Sit back, G. This is gonna take a while.
I'm just saying. And Gilda finally shows us her truest of true colors by not only destroying Pinkie Pie, but what seems to be a near attempt to harm her. You know, honestly, I think if Pinkie Pie weren't pretty much invulnerable, I would say that she'd probably come out pretty injured in this case. I mean, really, she fell pretty far off from where a cloud was. Granted, clouds are way closer to the ground in this show than they are in real life, but I digress. And so Pinkie comes to a conclusion about Gilda's personality. She's mostly right, but still, we see a different side to her later on in the series. Pinkie Pie then goes to see Twilight to complain of her woes. I'm not sure why she chose Twilight in particular. Maybe it was a way to endear Twilight to her a little bit further by showing, hey, I'm coming to you with my problems and my complaints. This is something that only friends do with other friends. Once again, Twilight comes off like she's not listening 100% to what Pinkie has to say, meaning that she's hearing the words, but she's not really getting it. And she comes to the completely wrong conclusion that Pinkie is just jealous. And in a way, I think this is also meant to fool us the same way it fools Pinkie. Pinkie initially reacts rashly to this, saying that she's definitely not jealous. She's flabbergasted by the suggestion of it.
Her attitude. Improve my attitude? But it's Gilda that, are you serious? Ah!
However, it does come to the point where she herself considers that maybe, just maybe, I am jealous. Maybe I misjudged Gilda. A little later, we catch up with Rainbow and Gilda, who have to separate because, of course, Rainbow has an actual occupation. And as she herself points out, here...
I'd never leave Ponyville hanging.
And of course, being that she actually has a job, she's got to go do that. So, you know, Gilda dismisses it. She lets her go. Although I will say that Gilda's dialogue...
Yeah, that's cool, I guess. I'm gonna go chow down.
Ugh. And so this is the part in the episode where we see Gilda's jerkish behavior. She does things like scare off Granny Smith.
Ah! A rattler! A rattler! Run for the hills! Everybody run, save yourselves!
Then she makes a rather rude comment about a tomato.
This stuff ain't fresh, dude.
Can be a bit of a jerk. Hell, there is such a thing as lovable jerks. You all know those kinds of characters. We all love them. They can kind of come off as, you know, roguish. You know, they kind of do bad things at times. But in the end, they tend to be nice people. They just, you know, don't know how to express themselves properly. Gilda, on the other hand, here shows that at this point in her life, she's not exactly about being any sort of nice to anybody who isn't Rainbow Dash. However, the major slight, and the thing that most people, especially those who have a bad habit of holding a grudge, and still hold a grudge to this day against Gilda, despite her apparent reformation later down the line, hold against her. The thing that truly paints her as a jerk here, and really is something they established early in the episode to show us that you can't do it, is she yelled and even roared at Fluttershy.
Ugh, please. All these lame...
Now, I have my problems with Fluttershy. Most of them are pretty minor. And yes, she's pretty low on my list of favorites among the main sis. But you don't mess with Fluttershy. You hear me? You don't mess with her. Pinkie Pie, take her out. That's how you do it. Ignoring whatever the heck that was, Pinkie Pie decides to retaliate as only Pinkie Pie can. With a party! What is wrong with me? So these handful of ponies decide to help welcome Gilda, and we have a bit of fun.
Honored to throw you one of my signature Pinkie Pie parties, and I really, truly, sincerely hope you feel welcome here amongst all us pony folk.
And so, this is the beginning of a brilliant setup by the writers and the animators, trying to convince us that Pinkie is the one pulling all these pranks, when in reality, it's Dash. This works so well because the clues are all laid out for us, and yet, at the same time, so is the multiple red herrings. This is shown specifically through the actions of Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash. In the case of Pinkie Pie, she reacts in a way that, well, is Pinkie Pie, for lack of a better way to put it. However, because of the way she reacts to each given prank with absolute shall we say, nonchalant.
Spitting snakes. Some pony pulled their prank on me last month.
Ha ha. I bet I know who that was. You do?
Relighting birthday candles. I love that prank. What a classic.
Now I wonder who could have done that. Yeah, I wonder.
Each of these reactions show a lack of surprise on Pinkie Pie's part. As the person, or in this case, Pony, who threw and organized this entire party, the normal response would be to show surprise, assuming that she's not the one setting up all these pranks, which we know she is not. But being Pinkie Pie, she just goes with the flow. So really, even if she is surprised, she wouldn't actually show it, she would just enjoy the fun of it. Now let's take a look at Rainbow Dash.
Gee, the punch! Huh? Well, what do you... Hey, G, look! Presents! Hey, G, you're not upset about some silly candles, are you? No way, Dash. Like I said, I'm down with a good prank. Come on, then. Let's have some cake.
In the two primary examples, Dash is basically directing Gilda to the next prank.
What are you doing? We're spinning around.
This, for me, is the culmination of the whole episode. So many great things coming together to make a pretty good episode.
Another prank, isn't it? I'm going...
Of course, not forgetting to talk about the ending. Gilda, having dealt with more than enough as far as she's concerned, blows up, expressing anger that had been building up the whole time at the party. She expresses what she believes to be the lameness of the whole crowd and wants to leave, insisting that Dash come with her. It is here that Dash admits that she was the one pulling all the pranks the whole time.
Well, Dash and I have 10 times as much cool as the rest of you put together. Come on, Dash. We're bailing on this pathetic scene. Come on, Rainbow Dash. I said we're leaving.
You know, Gilda, I was the one who set up all those weak pranks at this party.
What?
Ooh. So I guess I'm Queen Lamo.
Come on, Dash. You're joshing me.
They weren't all meant for you specifically. It was just dumb luck that you set them all off.
I should have known. That dribble cup had Rainbow Dash written all over it. No way. It was Pinkie Pie. She set up this party to trip me up, to make a fool of me. Me? I threw this party to improve your attitude. I thought a good party might turn that frown upside down.
And you sure didn't need any help making a fool of yourself. You know, this is not how I thought my old friends would treat my new friends. If being cool is all you care about, maybe you should go find some new cool friends someplace else.
Yeah? Well, you are such an...
And so Gilda leaves in a huff, unable to form any sort of intelligent response, as people blinded by anger and embarrassment tend to do. And we get our moral for this episode, along with one more somewhat funny gag.
Pinkie Pie, I'm really sorry she ruined that awesome party you put on for her.
Hey, if you want to hang out with party poopers, that's your business.
I'd rather hang out with you. No hard feelings?
No hard feelings.
And a little bit with Celestia. I think this might be the only time we get her writing the response letter to Twilight.
Twilight Sparkle, my most faithful student. Oh, wrong ink.
And now for my final thoughts on the episode. I'll start by saying that I was surprised by how much I liked this episode. This episode didn't stand out to me the first time I watched it, but here I found that I enjoyed it way more than I expected. In fact, I expected to riff this episode and rip it to pieces, but in reality I enjoyed it a great deal. And I've got to be honest, this is probably the funniest episode so far. I don't know what it is, but all the antics going on in this episode are just hilarious to me.
And I was surprised by how much of this episode I actually found funny. In fact, I probably laughed more here than with any of the other episodes I've gone back to rewatch for these reviews. Another amazing strength of this episode would be the characters.
This whole episode is really good on characterization. Pinky, Gilda, even Twilight early on. While her behavior was sort of annoying, it makes sense for her at this point in the series. And, it's like, I mean, really, how do people do not give the writers of this show enough credit. They understand characters.
There's even a small moment of characterization for Fluttershy.
We briefly get this exchange between Twilight and Fluttershy.
Rare. You've met Gilda, right? What's she like? Oh, well, I'll tell you later, Twilight.
Where Fluttershy chooses not to rat out Gilda about her bad behavior. Now, part of this comes off like Fluttershy, like, kind of buckling under the pressure of being, attacked, by a bully. Maybe not physically, but still, she was attacked in public, just trying to help out a family of ducks. But in this particular case, I choose to see it as a sign of her character and her kindness here. While it's not as strong as the characterization showcased in this episode, it does show that Fluttershy is the element of kindness. She's not going to automatically ruin a person's, party when the party has been thrown specifically for them. And better yet, when her friend Pinkie Pie has thrown this whole thing together, she's not going to ruin it for Pinkie either. So it makes sense that she's not going to go about and ruin everything just because she herself was personally hurt. That shows character, and it shows why Fluttershy is great at being the element of kindness.
Overall, I'd say this episode has a few flaws, but nothing really worth mentioning. I mostly enjoyed it. I thought it was funny, as I said before, and I'd say this episode is overall good. It gets a score of 9, and again, the rank of good.
It's not great, but it could be so much worse. Not a grand compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. So, on my recommendation, please go rewatch it. It might just surprise you. I hope you all enjoyed watching this review of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 1, Episode 5, Griffon the Brush-Off. I know I mostly enjoyed making it. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if it so tickles your fancy. And once again, and forever, this is Mike, the Ringmaster of the Imagination Circus. See you next time.
Another fantastic goofy face for the favorites list here on Imagination Circus Productions. I mean, just look at it. The animators might not be doing it on purpose, but really, they've made this an art form. I love it!
No, I'm not to blame. Falling
Pinkie Pie welcomes Gilda herself with a nice hoof talon shake. What do we call? Okay, somebody out in the community needs to get on this. Figure out, what do we call it when two individuals are shaking their apparent appendages who have completely different appendages? Like, do we combine them? What's the portmanteau of talon and hoof? Anybody got any ideas here? Because I'm just kind of, whatever. But somebody please, like, if you could, just get back to me on that, because I'm definitely curious. Because it's possibly one of the most nonsensical things she's ever done in this series. For those of you who might argue that that's not true, when I say nonsensical, I mean in the sense that it's so adorable. Rainbow doesn't usually do adorable. She does stupid in a way that somehow still comes off as sorta cute, but to be fair, a majority of the stuff in this show is cute. It's kind of unavoidable. Gilda steals an apple, which I'd like to point out is her second slight against the Apple family, because while it's not a member of the Apple's family selling those apples, I wouldn't be surprised if they gave the person who is selling them to those apples to sell, and the person selling the apples only gets a percentage. I mean, really, it's not a bad, selling strategy when it comes to selling your wares. You don't exactly have the time to sell them yourself, so you get somebody else to do it for a small price. Minimum wage. And after another brief segment where we learn that apparently Fluttershy is older than Pinkie Pie, which is—
Welcome! Pinkie Pie, about this party for Gilda, do you really think it's a good idea? I mean— Don't worry your pretty little head about mean old Gilda. Your Auntie Pinkie Pie's got it all taken care of. I'm a year older than you. Gilda!
Which isn't that hard to believe, but again, we still don't know quite how old the characters are at this point. Seriously, how old are they? I have an idea about it. I have a personal headcanon about it. But could we not get an episode, or at least some kind of canonical piece of, like a comic book or something, an information, an encyclopedia of some sort, just to know, because I really do want to know, how old are these characters? I'm just asking. It's a simple question. Get on that, Hasbro. You know them bronies are gonna pay you a lot of money for that shit. Do it. Just do it.
I'm not to blame. I'm not to blame. Never wanted to. I'm falling in love again. I'm falling in love again. Never wanted to. I'm not to blame. 'Cause I was made that way.